The terrorists are so linked together, they are so associated and so organized. We, the world, we need now to be so organized.
From the notorious terrorist group Al-Shabaab in Somalia and Kenya, to the radical Ansar-ud-Din in Mali, the Ansar Bayt al-Makis ABM in Egypt, and the dreaded Boko Haram sect in northeast Nigeria, Africa seems to be under siege from the rising nature of terrorism. This edition of Security Watch takes a look at strengthening regional security in Africa. From Voice of Nigeria, I'm OLAJUMOKE, FALEYE. Since the 21st of December 1988, when a bomb concealed in a suitcase exploded and blew up the Pan Am Flight 103 in the sky over Lockerbie in southwestern Scotland, the world has been on the edge as a result of terrorist attacks. The September 11, 2001 incident when two planes, American Airline Flight 11 and United Airline Flight 175, were hijacked by Al-Qaeda terrorist group and crashed into the World Trade Center in New York City, United States, showed that the rise of terrorism was near. Today, these groups have made their impact felt in virtually all the continent of the world, and Africa is not spared. The challenge for Africa, therefore, is how to contain acts of terror, given the rate of poverty and unemployment on the continent. Nandi Ndaitwah Netumbo is the Deputy Prime Minister of Namibia.
Africa has the youngest population in the world, a figure which is likely to double by 2045. Furthermore, according to the African Economic Outlook, on average, more than 70% of Africans' youth live on less than $2 per day. This is worrying statistics, as it means that if we as Africans fail to address issues such as youth unemployment on our continent, we would face the risk of witnessing more conflict and unrest in our countries.
Prominent among the terrorist groups in Africa are Al-Shabaab in Somalia and Kenya, Ansar-ud-Din in Mali, Ansar Bayt al-Makis in Egypt, and Boko Haram in Nigeria. These extremists are largely influenced by radical ideology and in some cases are politically or religiously motivated. Technological advancement has also strengthened the activities of the terrorists. It's easy for these groups to network through devices such as phones, computers, just to mention a few. They forge bonds with others and even swear allegiance to more sophisticated and internationally acclaimed terrorist groups. Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud, president of Somalia, echoes the threat which the linkages of these groups pose to Africa and the world.
There are proofs and evidences that in some time Boko Haram has been trained in Somalia and they went back to Nigeria. The terrorists are so linked together, they are so associated and so organized. We, the world, we need now to be so organized. One important point I would like to add, this is the role of the countries that are facing the scourge of the terrorism. How much the world give a chance to listen to the local solutions, the local ideas. It has been reduced in the last couple of years, and experience shows that the world has reduced the tendency of imposing ideas from the outside. Local organizations are more important, although they may lack capacity in terms of finance.
These non-state actors have laid siege to Africa, demanding for sovereignty to exist as an independent state. In pursuing this demand, they bombed churches, mosques, military formations, privately owned properties, schools, and other government-owned properties in their host countries. In some cases, the groups trained their members in other countries and sent them back to attack their home front. This trend put Africa under immense tension and has spurred reactions from presidents in the region. Here is what Uhuru Kenyatta, President of Kenya, had to say on the issue.
Solidarity between us as African brothers and sisters sends a very strong message to the enemies of peace, to the enemies of tolerance, that we as Africans stand united in our efforts to defeat this enemy and to ensure that we are able to strongly push and advocate tolerant, democratic, socially just, and prosperous societies that are inclusive.
Jacob Zuma, President of South Africa, identifies external interference in countries and the pursuit of regime change as a major cause of terrorism in Africa.
The interference by outside parties in some countries and the pursuit of the regime change doctrine has perpetuated a cycle of conflict and instability in many parts of North Africa and the Middle East. The preference for military action instead of political solutions becomes a breeding ground for violent extremism and terrorism. There is a general agreement that everybody else, of course, we could best come together in an organized fashion under the UN system. We are ready, all of us, to participate in fighting terrorism. In Africa, there's a big challenge. In North Africa, for an example, the extreme kind of terrorist attacks, undermining of the security, and the AU is working on that.
Notable among the terrorist attacks in Africa were the beheading of 21 Egyptian Coptic Christians by the Islamic State of Syria and Iraq ISIS on the 15th of February 2015, the kidnapping of over 200 female students from the government secondary school in Chibok, Borno State, northeast Nigeria, on the 14th of April 2014 by Boko Haram, and the killing of over 100 students at Garissa University, northeast Kenya, on 3rd April 2015 by Al-Shabaab. These attacks perhaps informed the serious and more critical approach African leaders are taking to contain terrorism. John Dramani Mahama, President of Ghana, advocates that key regional actors like Nigeria and Ghana should lead the regional integration to end terrorism.
Ghana and Nigeria must lead the regional integration effort, which has enormous benefits for our individual countries and the region as a whole. We have in our discussions agreed to continue with our leadership in that direction, and the seeming similarities in our individual country visions and development agendas makes our work that much more easier.
Nigeria, no doubt, has had its share of the pains caused by terror attacks. Perhaps the country is paying the price for allowing the Boko Haram sect transform into a terrorist group rather than quash it from the beginning. Nonetheless, since President Muhammadu Buhari took over leadership through a democratic process, the military seemed to be winning the war on terror. At the 48th meeting of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, President Buhari, while applauding African countries for conducting successful elections, projected a regional approach to curb terrorism in Africa.
The election in Burkina Faso completed the cycle of 215 presidential elections in the region, successfully conducted in my country, Nigeria, Togo, Guinea, and Cote d'Ivoire. This remarkable achievement reflects our collective resolve to entrench democracy and good governance in the region, wherein is the rising scourge of violent extremism and terrorism. All these constitute serious threats to peace and security in the region, and therefore require our urgent and concerted actions.
The drumbeat of a regional approach to curb terrorism in Africa seems to be louder now than ever. African leaders are forging a bond to ensure that they nip terrorism in the bud. A typical example of such effort is the coming together of Nigeria, Cameroon, Niger and Chad to form a multinational joint task force to contain Boko Haram. However, there are those who believe that beyond the formation of a joint task force, more practical actions should be taken. Ambassador John Chikaye, former Chief of Staff, African Union, upholds this view.
There are resolutions of the African Union in supporting the multinational joint task force for the country, and therefore it has the full backing of the African Union. For me, what's more important is for effective implementation of the decision that has been taken to create that task force. And that's the problem of deployment of forces for peacekeeping on the continent. They need to act. They need to put in place the structures that will support the processes that the four nations, Nigeria's neighbors, are already working on.
Given the level of poverty, conflict, unemployment prevalent in Africa, and the reality at the moment that the continent must also contain terrorism, Yemi Osinbajo, Vice President of Nigeria, prefers possible solutions.
Attention should be focused on how the Peace and Security Council and the regional economic communities can enhance effectiveness and efficiency using their comparative advantages and various capacities within the context of subsidiarity and complementarity in the areas of early warning and early action, conflict prevention, peacemaking, post-conflict peace building, reconstruction and development, strengthening of democratic practices and good governance, as well as in combating terrorism and violent extremism.
The proliferation of terrorist groups is quite alarming, and their ability to network, change tactics and inflict pain on citizens through violent attacks call for concern. Therefore, a regional approach based on purposeful and vibrant action is needed to curb terrorism in Africa. It's on this note we end this edition of Security Watch. The program looked at strengthening regional security in Africa. If you have comments and observations, please write to the producer, Security Watch, PMB 40003, Faleyye, Lagos, or PMB 5089, Wuse, Abuja. You can also send an email to english@voiceofnigeria.org or visit our website www.voiceofnigeria.org.ng. On behalf of my producer, Destiny ONYEMIHIA, and the studio manager, Ismaila Jala, I'm OLAJUMOKE FALEYE saying goodbye.